In this video we are going to see another impressive victory for black with the modern defense. White started the game with knight f3. Black answered g6, with the idea of using the modern defense. White played c4 taking control of the d5 square, which is an important square in the center. Black played bishop g7, developing his king's bishop and occupying the large diagonal of dark squares where it will be very well placed, as it will exert pressure on the center. White played d4, placing a pawn in the center. Black answered c5, attacking the d4 pawn. Black wastes no time and begins to press against the opponent's pawn center, with the idea of destroying it. If white now captures the black pawn, black can continue with knight a6, and then capture the c5 pawn with a very good game. If white advances his pawn to d5, black can respond with d6, to reach a Benoni-type formation. Or he can even make the move b5, to play Benko gambit style. Or he can also play f5, to take control over the e4 square. Then he can continue with knight f6 and black has a good game. In the game white played e4, forming a powerful pawn center. Black replied d6, connecting his pawns, reinforcing the defense of the c5 pawn and allowing the development of the queen's bishop. If white now captures the black pawn, black can check with his queen on the a5 square, and then capture the c5 pawn and reach a Maroczy-type position. In the game, white played knight c3, developing his queen's knight. Now, black can develop his queen towards the a5 square, to establish the pterodactyl formation. Or he can capture on d4 to reach a Maroczy formation. In the game, they played knight c6, developing the queen's knight and increasing the pressure against the d4 pawn. If now white advances with his pawn to d5, black can respond with knight d4, placing the knight on a strong square in the center. And if white moves bishop e3, developing the queen's bishop and reinforcing the defense of the d4 pawn, black can respond with bishop g4, pinning the knight on f3 and increasing the pressure over the d4 pawn. For example, in case of d takes c5, black can play bishop takes c3 check. And after b takes c3, knight f6, completing the development of his minor pieces and attacking the e4 pawn. In case of, for example, c takes d6, black continues with knight takes e4 and has a very good game, since he can castle quickly, his pieces are very active and the white pawns on the queen side are very weak. In the game, after the move knight c6, white captured the c5 pawn. Black responded with bishop takes c3 check, to weaken white's queenside pawns. After the exchange of pawns on c5, the queens were exchanged and a more or less balanced position has been reached, since white retains the bishop pair but his queenside pawns are very weak. So, both sides have their opportunities. Now white played bishop e3, threatening to capture the c5 pawn. Black responded with knight f6, counterattacking against the e4 pawn. If white now captures the c5 pawn, black can capture the e4 pawn. And after bishop d4, black castles. After bishop d3, black plays knight d6 and has a very good game, since he will be able to pressure against the opponent's weak pawns on the queenside. In the game white played e5, advancing with his pawn and attacking the opposing knight. Black replied knight d7, defending his knight and at the same time defending the c5 pawn. White played bishop d3, completing the development of his minor pieces and threatening to take the bishop towards the e4 square, to occupy the large diagonal of light squares. Black answered b6, connecting his pawns and reinforcing the defense of the c5 pawn. Black prepares to develop his bishop on the b7 square to anticipate the opponent's intentions. White played bishop e4, occupying the large diagonal of light squares with his bishop and attacking the opposing rook. Black responded with bishop b7, to oppose the action of the opposing bishop, with the idea of exchanging pieces, to simplify the position and remove the opponent's pair of bishops. The game continued. Bishop takes b7. Knight takes b7. And now white advanced with his pawn to e6, to try to disorganize the opponent's structure. Black replied f takes e6, capturing the white pawn. White played knight g5, threatening to invade through the e6 square. Black responded with knight f8, to defend the e6 pawn and avoid the opponent's threat. White played bishop f4, to control the e5 square and prevent the black pawn from advancing. White fixes the weakness, so he can easily attack it later. Black played knight a5, activating the knight and threatening to capture the c4 pawn, which is a weak point in white's position. Attack against the opponent's weaknesses. The pawn on c4 is lost and white can do nothing to prevent it. If now white plays bishop e5 to attack the enemy rook. Black answers rook g8 and it would be similar to the game. In the game now white castled. Black played h6 to force the opposing knight to retreat. The game continued. Knight f3. Knight takes c4. Black already has two extra pawns and has an advantage. White played rook h to e1, putting his king's rook into play, which was the last piece left to enter the fight. Black played g5, attacking the opposing bishop, to force it to retreat. White responded with rook e4, counterattacking against the enemy knight. The game continued with knight a5. Bishop e5, attacking the black rook. Black played rook g8, to defend his rook. White played c4. And now black moved rook d8, activating the queen rook and opposing the action of the enemy rook, with the idea of exchanging pieces and simplifying the position, in order to finally assert the material advantage. White replied h4, desperately trying to attack on the king side to try to gain counterplay. The game continued. Rook takes d1 check. King takes d1. G takes h4. Knight takes h4. Knight g6, attacking two of the opponent's pieces with the idea of changing as many pieces as possible to simplify the position. White answered bishop g3, to defend his pieces and at the same time release the action to his rook to try to capture the e6 pawn. Black played knight takes h4. If now white captures the knight with the rook, to attack the h6 pawn. Black can follow with h5 to defend his pawn, and in case of rook takes h5, black plays knight takes c4 and black has a clear advantage. In the game white captured the h4 pawn with the bishop. Black responded king d7 and white finally resigned. Since white has no hope. For example, in the case of bishop g3, black can continue with knight b7. With the idea of bringing the knight closer to the center and continuing to improve his position. Black would win easily.